speaking of Liz, Liz, why don't you take the opportunity now to introduce us to our speaker?
Okay, it is my pleasure and my honor to introduce you to Dolly Grimes Johnson. Dolly is a person who has been in my life for at least 30 years, and it's to her that I owe my interest and knowledge of working against domestic violence. Dolly was she is a social worker, but she was the shelter director at Sojourner Family Peace Center. And it's really a tough job. If you think about it, most women who enter Sojourner are not coming under good circumstances. You know, they're running from a bad situation. For some, this is the last place that they can turn to for assistance. And some of you may not be aware that when you have a facility such as Sojourner, in order for it to function properly, you have to have rules. And some people don't like the rules. And that in itself can be an issue. But Dolly has always had a big heart. And what I want to add to it is I initially started working at Sojourner. Just clicked her off. Running parenting groups for the shelter. And we were contracted through Madison Area Technical College. So some of you can see how some of our lives really overlap. But without going into all the history, let's just say that there was a financial issue from MATC, and we were all told not to show up at our sites that evening or any time in the future. And Dolly reached out to me and hired me as an independent consultant. And that's how I got started in this field. And I went on to do support groups and so on. But Dolly and I, yes, she hired me. Yes, she was my boss, but she's also my friend and my confidant. So it is my pleasure, Dolly Grimes Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be with you, spend a little bit of time with you this afternoon. And Liz, thanks for suggesting me and referring me to Pat to do this. I'm trying to read, we're having a little, my son was helping me to get on, and we're having difficulties, and I thought I was gonna have to do this from the phone, but now he was able to get me on the computer. So I didn't hear some of the beginning stuff, but that's okay. So for this afternoon, what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking to you all about how Sojourner, Truth House, and later on Task Force both evolved into Sojourner Family Peace Center. Some of the information, some of you already might know already. And so for some, it will be a little refresher, and for some, it'll be new information. So like Liz said, I've known her for many years now. So Sojourner started back in started as Sojourner Truth House back in 1975, around that time. And and grew out of the grassroots movement. Some women were at UWM in the social work master's program, working on their degrees. And they were also manning the hotline, the crisis line that was in existence at the time. And they kept hearing women talk on the hotline about being abused and being afraid and having nowhere to go and didn't know who to talk to and so forth. And so they became concerned about this and decided that they wanted to do something about it. And That was Claudette McSheen and Connie St. John and Ross Reed and some others, just to name a few of them. And so they banded together and decided that they were going to talk to councilmen, all the people, etc., commission, to see what could be done about this problem and if they could establish a safe place for these women and children to go. They started off housing women in individual houses. So people were taking these families in and, into their homes, out in the suburbs and so forth. And that was fine for the time being. But there are also issues involved with that. For example, the whole issue of isolation, which is real big when you talk about domestic violence, the isolation which the abuser imposes on the victim or the survivor and the children, and isolates them from family members, friends, even their jobs. So that was an issue because they were further isolated from being by the fact that they were living in the suburbs. Then the issue of safety was also a problem. Safety for the families or the people that were putting them up, and safety for the victims themselves. And so they knew that they wanted all of these women and children to be in one spot, in one space, and hence the idea of the shelter. By then, not many shelters were around the United States. The first shelter was open in Austin, Houston. And so they did some research with that as well. And so after speaking to the council people and everybody else in the community they could talk to, they were able to get some money from writing grants. And back then there was a hospital called Family Hospital. Maybe some of you have heard of it or knew about it and so forth, no longer in existence. Family Hospital had a building, a house on like about 31st and Wisconsin. And so rented.
Family Hospital, I'm sorry, Dolly, are you referring to the one on 27th? That 27th and Wells?
Yes, that used to be on 27th and Wells, yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh. And they rented a space to Sojourner, and for a little or nothing, very, very little. And so that became the first home of the first domestic violence shelter for women and children in Milwaukee, called Sojourner, and then they named it Sojourner Truth House. Really, really quick. They then had to find a name for this shelter. And so after doing research and so forth, decided that they were going to name it Sojourner Truth, because they did all this research on these personalities and Sojourner Truth. Sojourner was also included. And as you all know, Sojourner is a former slave. And when she became free, her life changed. And she spent her life, the rest of her life, and I won't go into all that long history, we don't have the time, advocating for not only her own family's freedom, her children. Yes? Oh, okay, her children, children's freedom, but also other freedom, other people's freedom. And she made a lot of journeys. Her family named her Isabella, and her family called her Belle for short. So hence Isabella Bomb Free. And back then, slaves took the names of their slave owners, and her name was one. She had many names over the years, but the name I remember the most is Bomb Free, Isabella Bomb Free. And when she became free and was making all these journeys, she was a very religious person as well, spent a lot of time with the Quakers and learned a lot. And she said that God told her that now that she was free and was doing all this, good work, she needed to have a different name. Now, she was the woman that would appear at meetings that only men were allowed to appear at. She would go to these meetings and sit quietly and wait. And then at the end, she would ask to speak. And she would say her words and so forth. And she would listen. And people even questioned if she was really a woman. And hence that speech, that she made years ago, am I a woman?
Ain't I a woman?
Yes, that she made years ago, that famous speech, challenging those that were, questioning if she was a woman or not, because of her size. She was a tall woman, and stately built, and so forth. And women did not go to those meetings. Women were not allowed to vote. And so she was speaking against those things. And she said women should be allowed to vote. Anybody should be allowed to vote. Women, men, anyone should be allowed to vote. And so she went across the country speaking against all the ills of society, whether it was slavery, the rights of women, the rights of men, the rights of children. She spoke against every ill of society that she came across, that she knew of. And so she wasn't a well-liked person. And again, like I said, was challenged a lot. So then she said God came to her and told her to speak the truth. And so said her name should be Truth. And so she changed her name because she was making all these journeys. She changed her name to Sojourner Truth. And so when the ladies read about her, they liked the fact that she was a strong advocate in all different arenas. And so wanted the shelter to be named after someone that was strong in faith, strong in beliefs, and strong in advocacy. And so they named her, named it Sojourner Truth House. So then Claudette was made the executive director of Sojourner. She was one of the founding members, and Claudette McSheen. And so then after moving into the shelter on 31st in Wisconsin, they quickly outgrew that space and knew they had to go someplace else. They also at the same time were realizing that the names of the same men were appearing on multiple intake forms. So they saw that, oh, this man is abusing, he has abused several women that are in the shelter now or have come through the shelter program. And so they knew that this had to go beyond being an issue for women alone. And so then they wanted to do something also for men, for the abusers that were, causing these problems. And so then decided that they would start an abuser program, but knew that that program could not coexist with the shelter. And so they started looking for another space. One, because they wanted to start the abuser program. Two, they had outgrown the space on 31st and Wisconsin. And so the director drove around, as she said, and found this duplex on 35th and Highland and said, oh, this apartment, full family dwelling will be the new home of the shelter. And so again, they involved the community, wrote some more grants, were able to get money and get community support, and were able to renovate that apartment building into what became a 35-bed facility for sheltering women and children that were being abused. So then they moved to that location, I think probably in 1978, 79, something like that. And Claudette was there until 1983, 84. Then she left. Now I joined Sojourner in 1983. By now you have noticed that I have an accent and probably wondering where this accent is from. So in order for you all not to be thinking in your minds, okay, and guessing, playing the guessing game, okay, is she from Jamaica or is she from, wherever? Let me just say, I'm from Liberia, West Africa. And I came here in 1979. And people always ask the question, what brought you to Milwaukee? And I say to them, Milwaukee actually chose me. I came to go to school to study social work. And And I wanted to be a social worker. And so I had applied to schools in California first because I had a friend that was going to school in California and was writing me all these beautiful stories and letters about California. So I knew I had to end up there too. Well, my mom said, since they were supporting me and said, find a school, to back up a little bit, find a school anywhere in the world. And we would, anywhere you want to go, we'll support you. And I said, oh, my first thought was, I'll go to school in Paris. So I'm thinking glamour. I'll go to school in Paris. And so then I'm telling my friends, and they said, how are you going to go to school in Paris when you're not even fluent in French? So you're going to spend time, years, learning French first. And then before you will start going to college, it's like, oh, no, I'm not doing all of that. So that's when California came into being. And then my mom said, look for a school on the East Coast or Midwest, because she said California was too far. She said from the time she would travel, and she hated flying just like me, from Monrovia, which is the capital of Liberia, fly from Monrovia to California. No, first to New York, and then New York to California. She said, I'll be dead. So she said, find somewhere closer where it'll be shorter. It's like, okay. The real reason I found out later on, she thought I was going to go to California and just turn wild and join whatever was going on in California and become one of them. So, but she didn't want to say that then, of course. So I looked for school in New York first, the East Coast, because they went to school in New York. My dad was the first Liberian and I think first African to graduate from Harvard Law School. And my mom went to Regis College. It was then for girls only, now is unisex. She went to Regis College for college, and then she went to NYU for her master's in economics. So I said, well, I'll just apply to those schools too. So I did. And I also applied to Columbia because my dad, after Harvard, did a master's there in public policy. And so they told me, I was all excited, and then I got letters saying that I was too late. My application came too late, and that they were not accepting any more students in social work for that semester. This was 78, and that I needed to, they will hold or pass it over to spring of 79. By then I was all reared up to go, and it's like, oh, you know what? Any school that accept me now, I'll just go. And so then a friend had gone to UWM, so I applied to UWM. People were praising, and the few people that knew about UWM and Wisconsin were praising Milwaukee. And so it's like, oh, I'll apply there then. So I did. Nobody told me about how cold it was going to be and snow and all that kind of stuff. I never experienced snow before. Nobody said anything until after my application was in and I was accepted. And of course, UWM was the first to accept me. Then they said, you going to UWM, you going to Milwaukee, you're going to freeze. It is cold there. And it's like, oh, then I started praying, God, please don't let UWM be the first to take me. And sure enough, UWM was the first. And my mom said, if you're going, you got to go now. And so then I had to come. And when I got here, came by way of New York, I was a little bit disappointed because back then we were hearing all those beautiful stories about, you know, different places in the US and New York and California and so forth, and Chicago. And when I saw, you know, I mean, I wasn't impressed with the tall buildings and all like that, you know. What I was looking at was how clean or dirty it was. And I said to myself, this is the United States? Boy, I'm disappointed. I said, because I see water running down the sides of some of the streets, you know, I see vendors, you know, with their stuff out on the sidewalk. And it seemed like, you know, some places back home. And I'm saying, but this is not that different, you know, what is so different? And when I came to Milwaukee, I stayed there for a week doing my winter shopping and so forth. When I came to Milwaukee, then I saw the difference in cleanliness. And I said, oh, now this is what I expect the United States to be like. Milwaukee was so clean back there. It was extremely clean back in 78. and the air was smelling so fresh and clean and so forth. And it's like, yeah, I think I'm going to like it here. So I got situated at UWM. And after my first semester there, my dad came over in 78, 79. You remember we had that huge snowstorm. So for someone who had no experience with snow, it was very interesting for me, very interesting. And so he came and then he said to me, all the letters, the places you applied for, they all accepted you and you can go in the spring, you can transfer if you want to. And I said, oh no, I've been here one semester. I'm getting really settled in. I've made some friends, so I'm just going to stay. And so I decided to stay and make Milwaukee my home. So that's a little bit of information about me, or maybe a lot of information about me and how I got to the United States. And after I was done with my program, I did social work and counseling. When I was done, I decided instead of going back home, I wanted to work for a little bit. I said, let me, experience the work environment here. And so I started applying for jobs and so forth. And everybody was telling me, you don't have enough experience. You don't have enough experience. And so I said, well, how am I going to get experience if no one is willing to hire me? So I saw this job for a family advocate advertised in the Milwaukee Journal from Sojourner, and I decided to apply for it. That was back then. Now I don't think anybody looks for a job in the newspaper to show how long ago that was. And everything now is via internet, and so forth, and social media. So I applied for the job. And I understood that 7 people, it had come, so many people had applied and it came down to 7 people. And so then they brought it down to 2 women, this other lady and myself. And before that, people that were in the program before me that graduated were saying that, oh, they were graduating and making, let's see, the starting pay was like 18,000 up. And so I was so excited to graduate and say, I'm going to start making my 18, 19, 20, 22,000 too. So when I applied to Sojourner, small, nonprofit, social service agency, like I said, the interview came down to 2 people, me and another lady. And during the second interview, it was Claudette McSheen and the board president or vice president, both vice president, the 2 of them were interviewing me. And at the end, I didn't hear anything about salary. So any questions? I asked my questions and then I said, I haven't heard anything about salary. What is this position paying? And to my disappointment, I heard, oh, 14,000. And it's like, oh. And then I paused for a while, I didn't say anything. And meanwhile, I'm thinking in my head, what happened to 18 and up? 14, what happened to 18 and up? So then Claudette said to me, do you have a problem with that? Will that work for you? And I knew that there was this other woman waiting in the wings, if I didn't take it, it would give it to her. So I started quickly doing the math in my head. I said, well, I'm a single woman and, I can make this work and work my way up. And so I said, no, I don't have a problem with it. And got hired for the job. And that was, like I said, 1978, I came to the US. 1983, I started working at Sojourner at the new location on 33rd and Highland. So when I started there were, just before I started, they had, I think it was like 5 women's advocates and 3 children's advocates. So 8 people working directly with the families. So just before I got hired, there was a change. They made a drastic change in staffing. Looking at funding down the road, the board decided that the staff was too large for such a small organization. and wanted to make some changes because they didn't know how funding was going to pan out down the line. And so then they decided to combine those 8 positions into one. And they said that the women and children came in as a unit, you know, and so they wanted to hire a family advocate, a social worker who would be the family advocate working with the women, with the children, and with the women and children together. And so hence I got that job and started to do that. And so I was doing that and working that job. And after a year of doing that, Claudette McSheen, who was married and became pregnant, decided that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom for a while. And she announced at a meeting she was leaving. And I almost fell from my chair and I said, oh my God, who is going to mentor me now? I'm fresh out of school still, and here I am going to be on my own. And so as it turned out, they brought in Kathy Stokman, who was helping as a volunteer in terms of trying to put the volunteer program, you know, into place. They had 1 or 2 volunteers. Volunteers were not allowed to be dropped off in front of the shelter because the shelter was a confidential address. Clients were dropped off and picked up 2 blocks away from the shelter. So were volunteers. Only paid staff, I believe, were being dropped off or could drive up to the shelter. So when Kathy was also hired not only to revamp this or start up a strong volunteer program, but also a stronger 24-hour crisis hotline. And she said, oh, we used to get a lot of donations back then. And they were just inundated with clothes all over the basement. And so Michael Stokman, who was on the board, said he volunteered Kathy to come on at his wife as a volunteer. And he said, I know someone who can whip all of this into shape, you know. And so he stepped off the board. Kathy came on as a volunteer. And of course, she did organized everything in terms of the donations that were coming in. And so when Claudette had resigned, they made Kathy Stokman the executive director. And she changed the policy of volunteers not coming to the shelter. She changed that to volunteers must and can be dropped off in front of the shelter. Her thing was these people were giving of their time. And if they were coming to provide a service, their loved ones needed to know exactly where they were going and where they were coming from. And so she said that they must be dropped off, they can be. And so that policy changed, you know, with her. She started in 1982 and changed that. She also wanted more volunteers working on the hotline and working hand in hand with its staff and learning all about domestic violence. So she expanded that program with the numbers of volunteers working in the shelter as well as on the hotline. Any questions so far?
We are opening it up for some questions. I see Barbara Rasmussen ready.
So thank you, Dolly. And so at that time, you're saying the shelter location was held secret, right?
Yes, yes.
That's changed now. Well, obviously.
Yes.
You know, when they built the big building, but.
Yes. And I will come to that too. I will address that some more.
How that came about,
Yes.
that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I'll say is I was so grateful that you opened it up to like League of Women Voters. We had our lunch and learn there when we were meeting in person.
Mm-hmm.
And I always felt proud to be at your location at Sojourner Truth. I just felt connected to that history. And Dolly, I want to thank you for your introduction too, to tie it all in with Sojourner Truth. It's such a powerful story.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, to continue then. So now we are at the 35-bed facility. And so this was like upstairs and downstairs. They're building kitchen on the first floor, offices on the first floor. And there was one bedroom on the first floor because we had to accommodate, anyone that had, that was confined to a wheelchair or using a cane or something, as opposed to having them go up the stairs, to a bedroom. The rest of the bedrooms are upstairs. There was a group room upstairs as well, or group room, TV room. And later on, we changed one room into a staff office because we wanted staff to also be on that floor. We added one more room downstairs. So a room that was the another staff office downstairs, we changed to a bedroom. So then it went to 36 bed as opposed to 35. So again, it was only for women and children. And as time went on, people were, when I say people, the board and the community and so forth, and around the country, things were changing. And other shelters were questioning whether they should still be confidential address. And as the discussion went around the country, Sojourner too was having those discussions as well. And the question was, are we going to expand in terms of providing services to more clients? Are we going to open it up to the community and involve them more than we have been in the past? And so that was something that the board had to discuss and so forth. Kathy Stokman would say the competition is so great between the domestic violence programs, because now you have Sojourner Truth House, you have Task Force on Family Violence, you have Milwaukee Women's Refuge, and they all were competing for the same funding sources. And she was saying that I wish that there would be more collaboration between these programs, and that in terms of funding, in terms of referring clients, and so forth, instead of competing with each other. And so then they decided that she decided rather that she was going to hold these meetings and invite other agencies to the meetings and so forth, bring everybody to the table, and let's talk about how we can come together and open this up so that it's more collaborative. And so those meetings went on for quite some time with Kathy Stokman and these other directors. Carmen Petrie was director of Task Force. She came from the health department, and she was then made, because Debbie Nisu was one of the founders of Sojourner Truth House, she was made director of Task Force on Family Violence. Connie St. John, she started a shelter on the South Side called Milwaukee Women's Refuge. And so those founding women, expanded, and they went to these other places. Of course, later on, Connie left, Debbie Neese left, and then Carmen was brought in. And the discussions were between now Carmen, Kathy Stokman, and Carrie Treadwell, who was now the director of Milwaukee Women's Center. And so they were discussing, and then later on included Mariana Rodriguez, who heads the Latino Resource Center. And they also, do some domestic violence work as well with the Latino population, and anyone else who needs their services. So out of these discussions came the idea of merging Sojourner Truth House and Task Force on Family Violence into one organization. And so many discussions occurred, and with staff, with the boards and so forth. And finally, the idea came about to have, they looked at several places as to where is this new location going to be? Because now that the two came together, there was still a space issue, because the administration and programs that were working, that were Sojourner programs, but they were working with non-residential clients, were at this location called, we call it Germania building location downtown. And then the shelter was still on 33rd and Highland. And so we needed to bring all of this together under one roof. And the whole idea was to provide a one-stop stop so that clients wouldn't have to run all around the city like they were doing to get services, but that it will be under one roof, again, safety being a key issue to be addressed. And so they started looking for places to build this new spot, and finally landed on 6th and Walnut as a possibility. And I know staff was very involved with the entire process, step by step. They included us, even to the point of how the shelter should be built, how many beds, and some people were suggesting huge numbers and so forth. And I said, wait a minute, we're coming from 36 beds. And I said, we don't want it to be so large, like 100 or whatever, that is going to feel so institutionalized. And my thing was, I wanted it to be manageable, something that I felt I could manage with my staff. And so I suggested, what about, no more than 56 beds? And so we landed on that. And I said, now, even with 54, 56, you still would easily have 60 or more residents there. And I said, so long as we didn't have 100 beds, 75 beds, I said, I'm good with that, And so we had 7 bedrooms in this new shelter. So then the shelter was built, 6th and Walnut House, the administration, and then the other end, which is Galena, and 6th and Galena held the shelter, the current shelter. So involving the public and trying to match up with what was happening around the country in terms of coming from secrecy, the shelter being secret, and confidential address to a public address, so that the community could be more involved. The shelter address became public. And I know we struggled with that for a while. Is that a good thing? Is that going to bring more the location? All those questions crossed our mind. We discussed those issues, back and forth. We compared with other places to see, what was happening there in terms of them becoming public, other shelters and other domestic violence programs and so forth. And finally decided that it was worth trying, because even though a lot of people thought that everybody knew where the shelter was on 33rd and Highland, there were a lot of people that didn't even know where it was. Now I'm going to ask you all, how many of you knew that the shelter was on 33rd and Highland, Sojourner Truth House? 2? Only
Well,
2?
Dolly, I have a question.
Yes.
And my question is, wasn't the reason for it not being public, the location not being public, is because that people were concerned about the very people that these women were trying to escape from would then try and follow them to the shelter?
Yes.
So what happened with that when they decided that it would be public? Has that ever been a problem? That an abuser showed up at the shelter to looking for his wife or his partner?
Yes.
His or her, I guess I should say his or her.
Yes, his or hers, yes. And that's where I'm leading to now, to talk about that. So when we did our due diligence with comparisons and so forth with other programs that have gone public, let me say that when we were on 33rd and Highland, A lot of people might have known, but I guess they respected or they were afraid to show up in terms of abusers and relatives and so forth. We did not have that many people. Like I said, I was there from 1983 up until we moved from there 2014. And I can count how many times an abuser showed up at that location. 10 times. 10 times in the entire time I was there. They showed up on 33rd and Highland. And we had a bomb scare once there. We had 2 other threats. That was it. But what would happen was when people would come and ask about someone, we would just tell them that this was private property and that we didn't know who they were looking for and that they could keep on looking in the neighborhood, but we didn't know who they were looking for. This was private property and to please leave. So, you know, those few times they didn't challenge us. It was just the bomb threat and the other threat, those 2 incidents where we had to involve the police. Now, when we moved to Galena, 6th and Galena, nothing was happening in terms because we were wondering, okay, are they going to be coming? Are they going to come? But nothing was happening. And then one day, this one guy came and it seemed like he was determined to, you know, break his way into the shelter when we wouldn't let him in. So of course, having that situation, you know, with a public address and so forth, we had to have security. And so security is at the 6th and Walnut, you know, side. And when you go, you ring the bell, you know, you come through the first door, you ring the buzzer, and then they have to let you in and so forth. You will be met with someone at the information desk or security, and then the receptionist. So this person came, you know, and the thing is, the lady was in, she had been out for a while, then she came in, then she was in the computer room, which was between the shelter and the 6th and Walnut address. So she was in there and stayed there for a little bit. And then we were looking for her because she was demanding, ringing the buzzer and asking for her. And we kept saying, we don't know who you're looking for. We don't know who you're talking about. Please leave, please leave. And he wouldn't leave. And then he said, I'll break down this door. And then he tried to break, you know, it's all glass. And he tried to break the door down. And we got scared. Even though it was, you know, tempered glass and so forth, you couldn't, you know, just break it down like that. It was too strong. We were still afraid that maybe he was going to do it because then he started running and then running towards it and kick it. And he would run back and then kick it. By then it's like, forget this. I said, let me go and call for help. They had called for the police. The police hadn't come through all of this. So I ran upstairs to sensitive crimes. I said, look, I know this is not why you all are here, but I need you all to come and help us now because City of Milwaukee Police not here yet. And we need help because there's someone trying to break down the shelter door. And so the officers from up there came from upstairs, sensitive crimes came down to investigate. By the time they came, he was gone. But he tried to break down, kick down the door, whatever. That didn't work. But we sure thought that day the door was going to be broken down and we're scared. And it was kind of in the evening too when all of this was happening. So administration people were gone and just me, the shelter director, and a few of my staff, you know, were in shelter. And of course, sensitive crimes police officers were up there. And so they came to the rescue. But like I said, he was already gone. But that was the only major incident. Since then, after that, we didn't have another one. If so, like that, 1 or 2 came to the door and asked, and then we just gave them the same reply, no, we don't know who you're looking for, and they just moved on. So I hope that answered your question. Hello, did it answer your question? Is she still there?
Yeah, Bartels, Dolly is asking if that answered your question. We'll move on.
All right. So
I thought you gave a lot of detail on that. And it's made me wonder what makes it all worthwhile to you, Dolly, all this work that you've done, what makes it all worthwhile? Well,
the thing is, I had to give that answer that everybody gave, and that is, I wanted to help. I wanted to help. Yeah, a lot of people wanted to help. You know, everybody wants to help. But I looked at it as a calling, as a passion. And I always tell people that we are doing passion work here, and I certainly wasn't doing it for the money, because remember what I told you all, I started with 14,000.
Yep.
So if it was only the money that was driving me at the time, then I would have kept on looking, elsewhere and so forth. But I wanted to do the work. And I always say Sojourner took a chance on me, because other people were saying I didn't have enough experience, and it took a chance on someone who was inexperienced that way and hired me. And I always consider myself a loyal person to a fault almost.
Mhm.
And because I felt that they took a chance on me, I felt like I owe them, years of, what I could offer. And once I started working there, I saw that the need was so great. There was always another woman, another child, another family that needed the support, that needed the guidance, that needed the help. And I would start from 8 in the morning, and I will be there until 10, 11 o'clock at night. Kathy Stopman would have to call and say, I'm just calling to see if she's still there. And then they would say, yes, she is. And she would ask for me to get on the phone, and she would say, you need to go home now. You need to take care of yourself. You need to go home now. There will always be, I said, but there's one more woman waiting for me to talk to her. And I told her I would talk to her. I can't disappoint her. There's always tomorrow. She's in a safe place. That's why you need to remember. She's safe. She's got food. She got people there working tonight. And if need be, she can talk to them, but you will be back tomorrow. So go home, take care, and refresh. And so I needed to learn how to do that, to learn to take care of myself. And I can't really say that I always took her advice. I can't really say that I always took care of myself, because I would be lying. I didn't always do that, once in a while, I would leave on time, but most times I would find myself there doing because, like I said, I felt the need was there. And truthfully, she was right. The need will always be there, unfortunately. And people, whether it is domestic violence or mental health, whatever arena, the need will always be there. You do and you do and you do more. So some of the programs, well, let me say how people come to Sojourner first, and I will talk about, mention some of the programs. So when we merged with Task Force and became Sojourner Family Peace Center, the organization moved in 2014, moved to 6 and Walnut. And then Sojourner Shelter I moved to Shelter February of 2016. So administration, the residential programs, non-residential programs, they all moved there before we did. And we were the last to move. And part of the reason for that was they were going to get settled and get acclimated to the area and to the things and so forth. And then meanwhile, I lost my mom and had to go to New York, and I was there. So when I came back, that's when we moved to Shelter from the 33rd and Highland to Galena and 6 and Galena. And that was quite a task, I tell you.
Dolly,
yes.
can you mention some of the partnerships, because some of the people will have to leave at 1?
Yes, I'm about to mention that. And so when we merged, we moved there. Then they moved first, and then the shelter moved. Now, part of the reason I said was to offer clients a one-stop kind of an idea, so that all of that will be available to them. So on site, we have Children's. Well, it was called Children's Hospital then when we moved there. So Children's of Wisconsin is one of our primary co-locators, partners. So Children's Hospital is there. Aurora Hospital also has staff there, has a spot there. Sensitive crimes, I mentioned, they moved their entire unit from downtown in the DA's office to the upstairs of the 6 and Walnut building. Core Central is there. And so Core Central provide wellness services to the clients and to staff too the clients free, but staff at a discounted price. And so that's massages and acupuncture, and so forth. Jewish Family Services is there, and they provide therapy and counseling to the residential as well as non-residential clients. Wraparound Milwaukee is there. Aurora is there doing crisis counseling as well as doing groups. Who else is there? Sensitive Crimes doing investigative stuff, and children's they're the ones doing the forensic, interviewing and so forth when children are being abused that are in domestic violence, situations. So those are just a few of the programs and agencies that are located on site. Some right now they have a breastfeeding organization that's there now. That's something new that's there. Okay. I left Sojourner in March of 2019. And so since then, that's a new program that they have there. The shelter has the program for the children's program that works with children that are in the shelter as well as non-residential children. They always had this. So when Liz and others used to do their groups, the moms used to be in a group, and then the children would be in children's program working with staff there. And so it wasn't just playing with the children, but actually teaching and learning, different skills and safety planning with them as well. So the moms got safety planning, the children got safety planning as well. Women in the shelter were also attending groups, attending therapy sessions. They attended, wraparound programs, and all the programs that were offered by the services offered by the co-located agencies were offered to residential clients as well. The Batterers program, that's another program Sojourner has. And I said that started back in 1982. And that program is no longer with Sojourner. Sojourner passed that program on to, what is that? Who they pass it on to? Liz, do you remember the name of?
I'm blanking, but it's over off of 4th and Center.
Mm-hmm. Okay, they pass it on to her and her program because she runs a program, a Batterers program.
Terry. Mm-hmm.
Huh?
I said Terry Strodoff,
Yeah,
but
Terry Strodoff. Yes, they pass it off to her, and so she now has that program. So
Alma Center.
Huh?
ALMA.
Alma Center, yes, Alma Center. And so Sojourner no longer has a Batterers program. And it still has the 24-hour hotline. And so people come by way of the 24 calling themselves on the 24-hour crisis line, or from the police officers, calling from the scene of the crimes, from the scene of the crime and calling it into the hotline, and then they process it. They can also walk in, which was not the case when we were on 33rd and Highland because it was confidential. People could not just walk in. Now they can walk in, to the Walnut side and meet with someone there and then be processed if they need shelter, come into shelter or process into one of the programs there.
Dolly, I would just add that they have to be buzzed in. They don't literally just walk in.
Oh, yes, yes, they have to be busting, because I mentioned before that, there's the outside door is unlocked, but then you have to buzz the second door to be let in by the receptionist or the um,
Security guard.
security guard, yes. And so that's basically how, or they can be referred, by themselves or by an organization, that they are working with, can also refer them.
Dolly, I'm going
Yes.
to interrupt.
Mhm.
Would you please mention the fundraiser that you had this year and that you plan to have one in the future, and invite everybody on the line?
Okay. Even though I'm no longer working in the shelter is and has been my passion. And I decided that, well, when I was leaving in 2019, they established a legacy fund in my name. And after I left, I didn't know what was happening with it. And after asking several times, I decided that I was going to just take matters into my own hands and do a fundraiser, because I didn't know how it was being promoted, or if people knew about it, how did they know to funnel money into that legacy fund that benefited the shelter solely. And so I spoke to Carmen, drew up a plan, spoke to Carmen and said I wanted to do a fundraiser. And so November 3rd of last year, I did my first big real fundraiser at the River Club in Mequon for the shelter. And I was able to, it was called, I named it A Taste of Africa, because I wanted it to be a different kind of a fundraiser than what everybody was having. And so I wanted people to come and have fun. If you have an African, attire that you wanted to wear, you could wear it. Come and eat some African food made by some African caterers, and hear African music. And we had some African dancers, we had African drumming, we had African artifacts all around on display. And so it was really a fun. And then I also had, not to get away from the main issue, which is domestic violence, we had some former some survivors who were former clients of Sojourner also come and they spoke. And I was able to raise $60,000 for the shelter, which was my first time. And so I became energized and said, oh, I want to do this again next year. So this year I plan to do it November again, November 2nd this time. And so right now I'm just going to find a venue. I'm looking for a venue, and Marcus Corporation wants to be involved, and they had kind of mentioned maybe they could provide a venue. So I have to talk to them towards the end of this month regarding that. So that was the fundraiser I had, and I hope to do it again and hope to be able to double the amount that I raised this last year, double it to 120,000. So I'm inviting all of you. I hope that you all will be able to come and enjoy, support, and leave hopeful that things could change or things could get better, because what do we have without hope? Nothing, right? So we all need to remain hope, to have hope and to remain hopeful.
Thank you so much.
Okay, that's
Patricia?
all.
Thank you, Dolly. We're so glad that Liz suggested you to join us, and I would like to help you on your fundraiser. I will be there on November 2nd, and I'll be including my friends in that invitation. Team, this is the time to just add a note of gratitude. We've heard a few already who had to leave. It's in the chat. Carol just said, I volunteered for the shelter for 2 years. I remember Dolly and Kathleen. They created a welcoming, warm atmosphere for everyone. Mary Ellen said that she had to scoot, but she learned so much from you. Another person who left said also just gratitude for being there. Lorna says, you are doing God's work. Bless you.
That's how I feel too, as if, it's God's work. And since I left Sojourner, what I've been doing really is kind of helping people that needed help with different projects and stuff like that. And so that has been like family and friends and so forth. And that has been really eye-opening, because I realized that if I had still been working at Sojourner, I would not have been able to do any of these things I'm doing, because it consumed so much of my time.
Absolutely. And all of us who have joined the retiree chapters of our life are also finding ways to say yes. Thank you so much, Dolly. I see there's another message, and then if you unmute yourself and want to say something. Mary Volker said, thank you, Dolly, and congratulations for all the work you have done. Jessica also said, thank you. She learned so much from you. I'm going to be quiet myself now. If I see that you've unmuted, you can put in your amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dolly, for your past work and for what you're doing now and for sharing that whole history. Thank you. I'm going to go.
Can I ask this name? I see Joanne Bart.
Yes,
Did
Joanne is here. Joanne, you want to say hi?
Joanne, did you used to
Yeah.
work at UWM? Yes, now I see
Right.
your face. That's Joanne I know. She used to be my former landlady when I was at UWM.
Dolly lived with us when she was a student.
Oh, that's
Yes.
great.
And that goes back, yeah, into the late 70s, early 80s. And that was
Yes.
one of the things when I heard that you were going to be speaking today, I wanted to be sure to be here because we
Yes.
need to reconnect.
Yes, yes. I really would like that. I saw the name and I said, oh, I made a mental note to, ask about that. If you were the same Joanne Bart that used to be at, UWM. And it's like, yes, as soon as I saw your face, I said, yes, that's her. Yes. But it's good to see you. Good to
Same
see
here.
And Sherry
But
Egan, thank you. Very interesting. And thank you for your hard work.
Thank you all so much for inviting me. Liz, thank you for suggesting me. And I'm glad we finally did this, because she had asked me before and I couldn't make it. So I'm glad I could now and was able to do it today.
Barb, did you want to say something?
I just want to say thank you, Dolly. That was very informative, catching up on the history of the organization and what's happening with it now.
Thank you, Barb.
And Renee has
I know
appeared.
Barbara.
Renee,
I
you
know
wanna say
Barbara
hello?
too.
Yeah, I remember when I worked at UWM too.
Yes, yes. That's why I say I know Barbara
The
also.
baby finally sleeps, and I didn't want to talk too much, but I really have learned a lot. Dolly, I'm a native of Peoria, Illinois, and recently moved here, and I'm really informed a lot about your organization. So glad I joined you guys today.
Thank you, Renee.
And let me just add that Sojourner, just to remember, Sojourner is the largest domestic violence provider in the state of Wisconsin.
Beautiful.
That's how big it's gotten. Yeah.
You've had impact on a lot of people. Well, I thank you all for coming today. Stay tuned. We will send you an announcement of what we're doing next month. If you have suggestions for speakers, I am very open to following the lead of people who are most impacted by injustice, who have a story to tell, who have a passion, who are working to make our community a better community. So thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you all. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Dolly.
You're welcome. Bye.